In the name of the one holy and undivided Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Recently, I've been thinking a lot about travel. This should come as no surprise. Summer seems to be the time to take a break and explore. Jennifer is off on a well-deserved vacation. School is over for everyone, and I'm beginning to think longingly towards next month when our family will take a week away. Not that I'm looking forward to being away from this community, mind you, but relaxation and restoration is important. That tug I'm feeling to jump in my car or get on an airplane and head off to the unknown certainly is not helped every time I open Facebook and see pictures of someone exploring a far-off place. Traveling, though a privilege, also requires of us a certain amount of faith. Whenever we arrive in a new place, whether it's the beach just down the road or somewhere on a new continent, we're placing faith in the hands of others, our very lives in the welcoming embrace of strangers. We leave whatever familiarity we can claim back home and grasp onto the fragments of what we've read in guidebooks or seen on travel shows. We hope and expect to be welcomed with open arms and guided gently along our way. Jesus reminds us this morning of the importance of welcome. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me. The act of welcoming the stranger, regardless of fear and unknown, is the same as welcoming Christ into our lives. It is the action we repeat week in and week out, right here, welcoming friend and stranger alike into our midst, and then sharing in welcoming Jesus into our midst in the Eucharistic feast. All of this appears to be contradicted by our passage this morning from Genesis. I suspect you know this story well, the binding and sacrifice of Isaac. God asks Abraham to take his son as a sacrifice to God, and Abraham complies. We are told that God does this to test Abraham, words that ought to trouble us all, especially in light of our gospel today. Does the God of testing Abraham and the God of radical, inclusive welcome sound to you like the same God? Now, we are given a few glimmers of hope in this troubling passage. Through the actions of Abraham and Isaac, we are shown that God provides all that is needed and responds to acts of faith with great faith in return. What goes unsaid is how God would have reacted had Abraham refused, or if Isaac had struggled. But also note what God first says to Abraham: "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love." Isaac is the only son of Abraham and Sarah, a miraculous child born well after Sarah would have expected to bear children. But Abraham already had a son, Ishmael, born by Hagar, their servant. While Ishmael does not get as much attention as Isaac, he is hardly written out of our narrative. Rather, God is expressing a moment of compassion, even amid such a horrifying request. While Abraham has another son, Sarah only has Isaac. Within the relationship of Abraham and Sarah, there is only Isaac. Now, I'm not suggesting that God's request would be made any easier if Abraham and Sarah had had lots of children. The loss of a child is an agonizing burden no matter what. Yet God recognizes the exceptional, that Abraham and Sarah, after a long marriage where children seemed an impossibility, finally had a child. And God is asking to take away what God had provided. I spent my day off this week in Petersburg, fulfilling that itch to travel, if only for a wonderful afternoon. I explored the Civil War-era battlefields surrounding the city, that last great stand at the end of a terrible conflict. Surrounded by the beautiful landscape, I was reminded of the horrors of that war, and how many mothers and fathers sent sons off to fight, knowing in their hearts they would never see them again. How so many parents never even knew what happened to their children, where they were killed, where they are buried. How they felt the same dread Sarah and Abraham must have felt when God asked for Isaac as the test of faith in God. How God weeps now for those who suffer pain and loss, or even the potential of pain and loss. Now, all that said, I'm not sure how the God of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac became Jesus Christ, the God of welcome, the God who sacrificed God's own self on the cross. Part of me is glad to worship a God who somehow knows the pain of loss, though I still cannot get over those words. God tested Abraham. I can only explain that sentiment as a human interpretation of something beyond human understanding. Yet in both accounts, that of Genesis and that of Matthew, we are challenged to transform ourselves, our lives, and our faith. We become who we welcome. In Genesis, Abraham becomes the patriarch to entire faith traditions by welcoming God as the greatest power in his life, however troubling the circumstances. And Jesus calls us to welcome all. This simple commandment is not as easy as we might think. We all have our biases. Here at Hickory Neck, I am continually amazed at how welcoming and hospitable this congregation is to those we know and those who we are meeting for the first time. But our natural human response is to gravitate to those we know and hesitate at the sight of stranger. We all have reasons to hold back, even in a community such as this one that understands the depth of what it means to welcome all. Welcoming is reflective. Who we welcome and the way we welcome them expresses just as much about us as it does about our feelings toward others. Jesus expresses this reality this morning. Whoever welcomes a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And whoever welcomes a righteous person in the name of a righteous person will receive the reward of the righteous. We all, as you know, are created in God's image. What binds us together, all 7.5 billion of us human beings, is that common heritage, the image of the divine reflected in each and every one of us. To welcome all, to truly welcome each and every one of those 7.5 billion people with such love and fervor that says nothing less than, I am glad you're here, you make a difference in this world. Welcome. To welcome all with such enthusiasm and openness is to become like God. We will all fail at this. And I don't say that to put any shame in your hearts on this beautiful morning. Far from it. For one, I share in this failing at least as much as any of you, and probably a whole lot more. I think of all of the times I have failed to welcome the stranger into my own heart, countless times. So I say all of this not to shame, but to remind us that each of us is imperfect, that we are not God. We are all practicing our faith rather than perfecting it. But in that practice, as we continue to work toward fully reflecting God's love to all, we can say this. As Christ welcomed friend and stranger alike, I welcome you to this place and into my life. Whether I've known you for years or have just now met you, whether you look like me or not, whether you talk like me or have the same experiences I do or think the way I do, thank you for being here. Welcome. Amen.